Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Just Love Inspires TV. I am so thrilled to have my guest here today, Dani, and she's going to share some wonderful things with you guys, and we're just going to have a conversation about it. So sit back, relax, just enjoy, get cozy, and enjoy this time that we have together today. Welcome so much, Dani, to the show. I just wanted to give everyone a little bit of your background too. So you're an accredited and certified betrayal trauma recovery and support specialist. And you also focus on stress and mind management, conscious communication, and post-traumatic growth. Is that correct?
Yeah, accredited
Okay.
and a certified ICF coach, but I'm trained in
Okay.
betrayal trauma. So
Okay.
for sure, I
Perfect.
definitely am in the certification process with that, but it's part of my experience.
Awesome. Awesome. So just so everyone understands, these are her areas of expertise and background. And so we're just gonna kind of jump into this conversation. So Dani, can we start off by you telling us what betrayal trauma actually is?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
So anytime you're in a significant relationship, someone that you trust wholeheartedly, most of the time this shows up in like a relationship, an actual relationship. Most of the people that I deal with are married, so they're dealing with a spouse. Sometimes betrayal can happen in like families, like parent, sometimes in institutions or in a workplace. But it's somebody that you've trusted, that you look up to, that has basically violated trust in some form. In the world that I work with, women who have been betrayed by their spouse. And so when they discover, either through infidelity, compulsive sexual behaviors, deceit, lying, some people have gambling addictions, any kind of addiction, really. And the partner, the wife in most instances, but it does sometimes work in the other direction as well.
Yeah.
They discover this, and there's this knowing of the facts that start to unroll, right? And so those experiences, everything that you thought was, all of a sudden comes to this screeching halt, and it affects the body. It like is internalized, it gets experienced. And what you're dealing with is just the ramifications of that discovery, which could be a one-time event or it could be a lengthy. So it's something that it's not, the trauma part isn't what happens to you. The trauma is the effect of what happened or what
Wow.
was
Yeah.
experienced. So
Right.
that's
And
kind
I
of it
think,
in a nutshell.
yeah, no, that's great. Thanks for that explanation. And I think that a lot of people don't actually think about that. I think they focus on the event itself, which of course is, natural to want to focus on that, but then not really understanding, okay, this happened and this is hurtful and I'm upset with this, but they're not understanding what's happening as it's been internalized and what's happening inside the body and the mind. And so I really appreciate that explanation, because I think it's important for every one of us to take note that when we experience something that's traumatic or painful or betrayal, what we're talking about right now, that is something that the body does internalize, and it can affect us even physiologically, which I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand. The only reason why I know this is because I've been through my own journey through trauma recovery, and that was one of the things that I learned in that process. So thank you again for that explanation. So what kind of events then would you give? One example already, which would be infidelity in a relationship, in a marriage. What other kinds of events would people come to see you for?
Well, if we're speaking like maritally or a significant relationship where there's this commitment, infidelity, compulsive sexual behaviors, just, I guess, trigger warning for some people. But if to answer the question, it could be in the form of addiction. So pornography, masturbation, um, that can expand out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some people are dealing with like drug addiction, alcoholism, where their lives, they've been leading a double life and or it's a blatant life. And it's become kind of like the norm in the home. And there's been this excuses for, or it's not that bad, like minimizing. And so it can come in different forms. If you're talking about institutions, just, like bait and switch, or this powering over, control, manipulation, gaslighting, all of those things play a part in betrayal, where there isn't authenticity, honesty, integrity, character. There's lying, deceit, withholding that happens. And this is somebody, like in my instance, like I had an idea of who this person was, or an institution was, or a workplace was, and you begin to experience things that hit you like this doesn't feel right. And until you actually kind of know what it is that you're dealing with, sometimes the partner feels like they're crazy. And so it kind of goes like unnoticed a lot of times. But the most common ones, I would say, have to do with in the sexual realm, and or a blatant addiction.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting. And I would think too that especially in a marriage relationship, or let's say just a really long-term relationship, people, and I've seen this and I've experienced this too myself in past relationships, that you kind of, and the body has a way of kind of surviving, wouldn't you agree? Like there's an adaptation that takes place in the mind where you kind of learn to survive, and that survival instinct, you just kind of almost in some ways keep prolonging or going along with whatever the situation is because of that need to feel either safe, even though it's not a safe situation or environment, or you need some type of what you would think of as normalcy. So I don't, for an example, I don't want to break up this relationship or this marriage because I don't want it to affect other family members or my children, or maybe I don't want to disrupt the workplace because if, I'm the one that everyone looks up to. So if I raise the flag and say this red flag and say this is not okay, then everyone else might feel that it's not stable. And then how is that going to affect them? Do you ever run into these types of conversations with your clients, like people maybe even feeling guilty about trying to make changes or get out of situations because they feel like they have to kind of hold down the fort, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And yes, absolutely. Again, in the world that I deal with, and I mean, this can vary from person to person because each person experiences their experience differently, right? But I do see a lot of shame, because whenever there's an addiction, there's going to be shame, things that are hidden in darkness, right? There's this covering, there's this hiding, which is what the one who betrays or is addicted to something or is lying, cheating, stealing, at the core of their being, it's probably not what they thought they would grow up to do or be, right?
Yeah.
And so there's this hiding, which is part of the problem, right? The partner or the other person that's experiencing that now knows what's really going on, sometimes goes into denial because, like in my experience, like not at all on my radar or anything I thought I would have to like face. And so we go into protective mode. So we either deny, minimize, or just like avoid it until like we can't function. And so there is that where people just, we want to make sense of things. And in some instances, we can't make sense of it. And so our survival is, what do I need to do to adapt in order to survive? Both actually, the one who's betrayed or acting out in any way and the one who's been affected are in survival mode, right? And an addiction can be a form of survival based on their pain initially, but then it morphs, it grows, it becomes bigger, larger, more encompassing. And then it becomes harmful to them, others, obviously family systems.
Yeah.
The guilt, what if, particularly like in more religious environments, just due to the nature of how people interpret things, a lot of times the wives will feel guilty, as you said, because maybe they weren't a good enough wife. Like if we're talking infidelity and sexual addiction, not a good
Sure.
wife, a good mother. I'm not performing enough in my duties as a wife, or even, just transactionally with like laundry and, oh, if I had just done this more, if I was like 20 pounds lighter, maybe this wouldn't have
Mm,
happened. So we're
mm.
trying to like find a reason why things happen, but it varies again from person to person. And we do adapt in order to survive
Yeah.
until it's no longer working.
Right. Yep. And that was exactly the point I was making, is that um, the the adapting is a means of survival, but what you're saying is there is a breaking point at some point for most people. I mean, because I've seen, because just by virtue of things that I've been involved with over the years, I know a lot of people, and have talked to a lot of people about their situations. And sometimes this stuff goes on for 10, 20, 30 years. But what you're saying is you think there is a point where people do have like a breaking point where it just can't go on. Is that what you're saying?
Most of the time. But I
Most of the
have
time.
encountered groups where individuals have stayed in marriages for 30, 40, even 50 years. They're stuck in a cycle. They
Mm,
only know what they know. And then if you bring in like a religious aspect, I mean, till death do you part.
sure.
Women are contending with that.
Mm-hmm.
And fear of what might happen to them or their family if they were to do something different. So it becomes like a fear driven decision. And
Mm-hmm.
and here's the thing, for again, this goes both ways, but I'm dealing primarily with women. The fear of, I've been dependent on this other person, this my husband, and I've been a stay-at-home mom for 20 years. I don't have an education. I don't have a job. How am I going to survive? How will me and the kids survive? So
Yeah.
people will choose to stay for that reason, is how am I going to make it in the world? And so, a lot of times there's physical abuse, definitely emotional abuse because of the manipulation tactics. Even people who have been beaten often stay in fear of, what will people think of me, and or their life. If I leave, he will come after me. I might
Right.
die. So
Right.
we have to be careful as a society not to bring judgment on
Yep.
individuals, whether they stay or go,
Mm-hmm.
because it is a hard decision either way.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a really important point. And I think sometimes we can, even as human beings, pile all sorts of additional pressures and rules and things that I would say even God himself hasn't asked us to do. It really is just the outside, the fear of being exposed, let's say, and the perceptions of other people that sometimes we really avoid. Like we want to convince other people that things are really okay. But what I think is really happening in a lot of cases is, and I think we've all kind of dealt with this in one way or another, is that we're actually trying to convince ourselves that it's okay. And that reflects in the way that we are, trying to manage the situation. So I definitely could see where, the fear and the feeling of really entrapment is what you're talking about.
It can
And
definitely be that for sure. And also,
yeah.
we're dealing with just ego, right?
Mhm.
And this sense of power. Now, like flip it for a husband who, discovers that his wife has been unfaithful with
Yes.
another man. It becomes very like demasculating for them. And
Mm-hmm.
they actually sometimes stay out of protection of this woman that they've married.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's just perceived so differently. And once again, people have to find their way through that. I do believe, though, support is necessary because these decisions have to come from a place of awareness and consciousness. Most of the time, we're operating in this unconscious mode,
Yeah.
especially in survival. When there's
Yeah.
trauma and we're experiencing its effect in our body, we're not thinking clearly. We kind of shut down, or we're in a fog, and you
Yeah.
literally go into survival. Some partners may start drinking or overeating, and or might cheat themselves, out of revenge. It just
Mhm. Right.
it's very complex.
Yeah, I can see that. And so with the work that you've done with your clients, have you come across situations where, and maybe some of them are still in progress with this, but have you come across situations where, let's say outside of infidelity, like where there's been addiction, alcoholism, drug use, addiction, like you said, to pornography, or maybe it's gambling or whatever, misuse of finances. Do you see that there's any type of reconciliation or a sense of repentance, let's say, maybe for lack of a better term, that ends up happening where they're able to overcome these obstacles and have some type of reconciliation moving forward?
Well, anything's possible, right? And
Yeah.
so it is possible for a couple who've experienced, like you said, these varied addictions, and or betrayal, whatever form that
Right.
might look like.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
it is possible for resolution and repair and rebuilding.
Yeah.
That takes time. And so, in order for that to happen, both parties have to be on board. If you're with somebody who's has an addiction and they are not willing to do the work, or commit to getting counsel, working with support groups, doing workbooks, engaging in conversation with the spouse, same with the wife and her husband, right? Both have to recover. They have to heal and recover and rebuild, both individually. And then as we both become aware of triggers, we're aware of patterns, belief systems, all of that. Once that happens, then there's this, like, a trust has to be rebuilt. So it's the
Mm-hmm.
consistency in the healing process, um, authenticity. And if you've been involved with like pornography, say since age 14, and then you're discovered like in age 40, like that doesn't just shut off,
Right.
right? If
Right.
they were hurting way back when, this has become how they've decided to deal with their pain. Um, Drugs, alcohol, sex, whatever, gambling. The
Right.
wife might have control issues, outside of, like control can also be indicative of trauma. But if there's this having to keep it together and create an image,
Mm-hmm.
it's not authentic. So both parties have to be able to look at themselves, the patterns that they've created in that union, and unwind, like take a step
Yeah.
back and
Yeah.
observe what has been our pattern. And then
Mm-hmm.
the thing that is necessary for this resolve is, number one, people have to feel safe and they need to be able to trust. Without that, it's not possible. If you
Right.
don't trust or feel safe, like, you can't heal. And the recovery takes time and there's relapses, it's not a one and done. And,
Right.
you know, and then you have to
Yeah.
commit to keeping at it, just like anything else. All relationships take time and effort and energy, and they don't just happen, as
Yeah. They
much
sure
as we'd like to
don't.
think. If only
I
it
know.
could all happen in 2 hours like it does on the movies.
Yeah. Well, and I was just going to say too, it's like in our society, we're kind of fed this fantasy of, okay, when I grow up, I'm especially for women, it's like, when I grow up, I'm going to get married, I'm going to find this wonderful guy and he's going to have all these, boxes checked. And then we're going to have a family and everything's going to be great. And then you realize really quickly, especially, you know, in marriage, that it actually makes you more of who you are, like more of who you are is actually exposed, because there is a certain point where people become comfortable, that fresh, like newly dating phase is over, right? And so then you start to see like,
Right.
oh, this person has this bad habit, or they have a tendency to behave like this, or I didn't realize that I struggled with this. Wow, and this is really showing up in this relationship.
Right. Because we put our best foot forward when we're in that dating, courting stage. And then for those that
Mm-hmm.
choose not to live together or have sex before marriage, like you're going blind. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then you start living with them. One of my teachers used to say that your soulmate oftentimes becomes your cellmate.
Yeah.
And, and then the opportunity, though, however, depending on the stance that you take, is to be able to observe reality as it is, right?
Wow, love that. Yeah.
And be able to deal with it, not within the drama itself, but as this witness to what's happening and how do I want to relate with it, which
Mm-hmm.
is not something people in general are good at, because we're
Yeah.
all about the drama and the story. People talk about their
Mm-hmm.
stories and over and over and over again. We perpetuate
Yeah.
the pain. We
Mm-hmm.
create our own suffering at that point. And so it takes this, as I mentioned, an unwinding and reestablishing and relearning core values, beliefs. For some relationships, pornography isn't a bad thing, but both
Mm-hmm.
people have to agree to that.
Right.
And
Right.
so if one is not, and that goes against their core values and beliefs, they have to decide, is this worth the price that this is going to cost me? And those are the hard decisions, that have to be made sometime.
Yeah.
Ideally, in a perfect world, everybody's doing their part. Everybody's able to get honest and real. But when you're talking about a pattern through a lifetime,
Mm-hmm.
even 5 years, like stuff gets like it's solidified, becomes dense. And we
Mm-hmm.
have to begin to break that down compassionately. But you're dealing with anger, resentment, bitterness sometimes will rise, both parties. And that's a whole other layer of healing and recovery, right?
So how do you, because I know you've mentioned like the authenticity and observing reality. I loved it when you said that. That was a great term to use. How do you, when people first come to you, how do you help them get to that point where they are authentic and real? Because I think one of the challenges that we have in our human nature to survive is to stuff, disassociate, stuff. It's okay. It's okay. It'll be okay. It'll be okay. Um, and like we were talking about earlier, there's a breaking point. But how do you help people who maybe you sense aren't being as honest about their situation, or not even like honest, but necessarily maybe not as in touch with how devastating the scenario is? How do you kind of, help them get to that place where they can, I'm kind of doing this like you're coaxing them, but you know what I mean? Like, how do you get them to a place of safety of like, hey, it's okay to be real about what's going on. You don't have to deflect.
Right. Well, it's going to depend, depending on the nature of like what walks into the office or shows up on Zoom. There's a history that's there. And so, I mean, I'm a coach and a holistic practitioner, so I will work holistically with individuals. I'm not a counselor or a therapist. And so I have to remember my boundaries as far as what I
Sure.
do. If something shows up in the present and something from the past is affecting them now, then I can go there. But what it takes time, Jessica, to be able to even establish trust with like the client and myself initially,
Yeah.
because I know for me, like I had issues with my own family of origin, then a spouse, and then a congregation, and then work people. My trust was nil.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I had to contend with whether or not I truly trusted God, because these were people, entities that I could see, and God was somebody that was invisible. And if the people I could see could harm me, how do I know that this won't either?
Sure. Yeah.
But for whatever reason, I took that, I decided to like, heck, if this isn't real, then I'm like, that's like not a good place to be.
Yeah.
So I chose to put my hope and my trust in God. and in the work that Christ had done. And really, I had to relearn a lot of that too, like what was real and really who God was and what Christ actually did for me. And it was just, this unfolding. Now with clients that I work with, it is the same thing. Like I need to find out where they are, because not every person I work with is faith-based. And so I have to kind of get a sense of their worldview or spiritual worldview. We establish a rapport, and then we begin to just break it down. A lot of times partners want to make it all about the person, right? Or the event or the thing, the other woman or the other man. And those are just, in my teachings that I've had, revealers of a deeper issue inside of me. And that takes humility to be able to go, like I have my own stuff. Like I didn't cause that, but I'm starting to notice things inside of me. And so then we have the triggers. We have to kind of like break down what triggers are, because if you listen to anybody talk, we have to blame, evaluate, assess, judge, condemn, shame others, typically because we need to feel better. But if we can like take that out of the scenario, then we're left to have to deal with our own feelings, our own emotions, which a lot of people, like Brene Brown, I love her work. And if people don't really understand or have a language for feelings and emotions, her Atlas of the Heart book is brilliant. It's also very pretty and it looks lovely on a table. Like I couldn't even mark it up. It was that pretty. But she gives language to emotion. So we have to start to deal with feelings, emotions, understanding thoughts that were not our thoughts, that they come and they go. And some are true and a lot of them aren't. And some of our thoughts are repetitive or negative. So we have to learn together in collaboration, like how to harness this, tongue, like the words we speak are so powerful. And so we have to learn that skill as well. My job isn't to keep a client forever. However, some clients are with me for longer, depending on the type of trauma that they're dealing with, the length of it. Some people tend to have a little bit more of a resilient spirit than others, but we're all capable of being strong and courageous and resilient once we know who we are. And this is an opportunity to discover who we are. And for those of us who ascribe to a higher power, who that is in our life and the meaning that gives to our life. And then how do we want to relate to all of the shizness that shows up on the planet that we have to deal with? Because some of it's beautiful and amazing, and others are more challenging and difficult and painful. All of it is part of life. We can't have just one without the other, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, and I don't know if I answered your question. Because it's like,
I loved it. I loved your answer. I thought that was perfect.
Timing and whatever it takes, as long as it takes.
Yeah, exactly. And I loved how you said that once you kind of dial down all the noise, you help them dial down all the noise. It really comes down to, okay, what's in my heart? Where am I at? What's going on with my thoughts and the things I'm saying or that I'm projecting? Before I'm worried about anybody else. And I think it's scary sometimes to get really quiet and start to realize, okay, who am I without all of these other things that I'm upset about constantly? Not denying the impact that they have and the hurt and the pain that you're going through, but it can be scary, I think, for people. And I know this because I've been in therapy for, different traumas that I've experienced, but it can be a little trepidatious at first, I think.
It's unnerving. It really is, because our identity is like that we established, right, is kind of being brought down. Like that ego nature of us, there's good ego, like we have to be able to think and make decisions, right? But the ego that rises up, that masks who we actually are, that allows for trust and vulnerability. We all have, we got armor on. So that starts to like crumble, right? And there's like a good armor and a bad armor. And so, we have to be able to deconstruct in order to rebuild, And it's a process, it's a journey. And there's metaphors, the heroine's journey, the hero's journey, where it all ultimately is finding your way back home to its original, like my original self that was, in my world, just divine. It came from God,
Yeah.
and it's pure in its essence, right? But we have to like move through life. We can't just skip it like Clint in the
Right.
movie.
Yeah,
Fast
exactly.
forward.
Wouldn't that be nice? But yeah, I know. And I think there is a definite reality, whether people have acknowledged God or not. There is a reality that we all deal with, which is this is a broken world. And we are going to encounter, we are going to encounter trauma. We are going to encounter pain, even when you have a relationship with God, it doesn't keep you from that reality that exists.
Yeah, we're
And
not
I think,
invincible.
right, exactly. This side of heaven, you're not invincible. You're not,
Right.
you're right. You're still going to experience stuff. And I think that's a reconciliation within itself is
Yeah.
to get to the point where you can come to terms with that too. But yeah, I love what you said about it being a journey. That's been my experience. And it's not even like a linear journey either, right? Like
Not at
it
all.
doesn't just go like this. Okay, I read this
No.
book, I had this session, I did this. It's like up, down, backwards. Okay, now we're going
Yes.
forwards again, right?
And it all plays a part, right? It
Yeah.
all plays a part. And if we could just embrace that, this is an experience that I'm having. Things don't last forever. Like you don't get slapped and you're slapped and slapped and slapped and slapped and slapped and slapped, like
Right.
continuously, And so you experience something and then you have to like deal with that or not. And you might experience it again. But at some point, it's like there's so many metaphors. Like if you go down the street and you see a hole, like you might fall in it, right? And then
Yeah.
if you go down it again, you might fall in it again. Then you like decide to like go a different route. And it's
Yeah.
just about trying to create a different way of moving through life that is a little bit more spacious,
Yeah.
that
Love that.
has a connection to, and here's the thing, I deal with people, like a variety of people. And so call that whatever you want, light, universe, love. I know what I've grown up with. I know what I
Mm-hmm.
believe, but I accept anybody who comes in. There's a
Sure.
starting point, right?
Yeah.
So if somebody doesn't believe in an entity of sorts, then can you ascribe to love? Because some people, Father, God, Father can be trigger, right?
Sure.
And so if love or a feminine energy initially helps them feel safe, I'm going to go there.
Yeah.
Because if they don't feel safe when we're interacting, then what we're doing isn't going to work. And I don't
Right.
want to waste their time, their money, their energy, nor mine, right? And so it has to be mutual. There needs to be an element of, for sure, compassion and grace. That's what I bring to the table. Like I call
Yeah.
it compassionate inquiry and soulful inquiry. It's just an approach that's more like expansive and open. Like I'm not
Mm-hmm.
there to change anybody or make them think a certain way. The process is just, I'm coming alongside you in this very difficult, painful place because I understand what this is like. I can't say I understand your experience, but I understand the nature of what you're dealing with and how
Mm-hmm.
I experienced it. So I kind of come alongside people. I definitely don't do their work. And
Yeah.
so, and that
Which
takes
you couldn't
time.
do anyway.
No, they have to develop a consistent showing up for themselves. And a lot of times when we're dealing with shame, people don't know even how to show up for themselves, let alone
Mm-hmm.
take space in a room with
Mm-hmm.
another person. And
Yeah.
so all that has to be established.
Yeah. And when you've been beat down, either literally or figuratively for so long in a relationship, whether it's emotional or physical, that I can imagine that's really hard. You have to rebuild your self esteem. Years ago, I was in a relationship with a person who, and I know this is a very overused term right now, but was narcissistic. And I was gaslit all the time. As I was saying, yeah, I was involved in this relationship with the narcissistic person, and I mean, they had the classic traits, and this was many, many years ago. I was in my 20s, but it took a couple friends and some time away from the situation to realize what I had truly experienced, it was hard to let that person go, because I was under their control just a little bit. But once I kind of took the step back, like you said, observing your reality of what had taken place, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't even believe I fell for that, because I see myself as such a strong, independent person, with the way I think and everything. So I think it's easier to fall into relationships, marriage, whatever, where there's control or addictions and things that people even try to hide, that you don't even realize it until you're in the situation. So I think what you were saying earlier about having compassion and less judgment, like for yourself and others, I think that that's really important, because I could have sat there and just beat myself up for the fact that I even got myself into that situation. But I had to have compassion for myself and to forgive myself and to forgive the other person. And that's kind of leads me to one of my last questions, which is, what role does forgiveness play in this whole process and this journey?
Well, it plays a key role. However, the timing of it, right? And really the understanding of what forgiveness is. Okay. A lot of times forgiveness shows up in, we pretend that what happened didn't happen, or, oh, it wasn't that big deal, I'll just let it go. The things that happen to us, we won't typically forget. What happens is the energy behind it, the intent behind whatever happened and whatever we're releasing, there's a shift that takes place. So in my world, forgiveness is something that I'm extending more so for me. Like I'm taking the hook out of that other person, which sets me free. Okay. So I'm not saying that what that person did, oh, didn't matter, it's okay,
Right.
it's or whatever, right? What I'm saying is I'm not going to give it the attention and the power that it's had on me. So I'm releasing myself, and I'm going to let higher power do what that needs to do. But I'm no longer going to be controlled by it. To the extent that I maybe had been controlled until I understand more about self-awareness. But forgiveness is a part, because there is, down the road, everybody's different. For really horrific things that happen, sometimes forgiveness has to be taught in this way, an understanding of just the releasing of the hold, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes we see repentance, we see restitution, we extend grace and compassion. It doesn't necessarily mean we jump back into the relationship either.
Right.
Especially if it's toxic. So we can like heal, see it for what it is, acknowledge that that person has their own journey that they're on. I'm choosing not to partake in it because it was harmful to me. So I'm letting go. And it's like, I release you to do you. I need to, which is a boundary setting thing.
Yeah.
I'm moving on. Sometimes when restitution, resolution, rebuilding, recovery, all that's happened, there can be this mutual understanding of one another, and this is part of the past, but we are now forging a new future. Like we're letting go of what once had us both, and we're both committed to moving forward. And so I do think it plays a huge part when it's time, when it's appropriate, and really clearly defining, just because you forgive doesn't mean you will forget. And just because you forgive doesn't mean you have to stay in a toxic relationship.
Yeah. Amen to that. I think that oftentimes people feel that if they forgive, that means that they have to keep coming back for more. You know what I mean? They have to keep enduring, the toxicity in the relationship. It doesn't mean that, I had a really hard time with my father, who had severe mental health issues. And there was a time where I said, I've tried to give you all the help that I can give you, but you're hurting me now. You're hurting my family. You're hurting everything in my world. And I love you, but I'm going to release you at this time to go and do whatever you feel that you need to do. That was really hard, but I had to come to the revelation that I was being hurt and beat up in this process of trying to help when someone really didn't want to be helped. And I think that's another dynamic too that we could spend a lot of time talking about, is when you're constantly trying to fix people, or you feel bad for them, so you stay involved in the scenario because you want to help, but they're not ready, and they keep throwing their poison at you. And so boundaries is great. Maybe we can have another talk at some point about boundaries. I would love that, because I think that's another thing in our society that, especially as women, we're not really groomed to acknowledge. We feel like we always have to be by the man's side, no matter what, even if he's hurting us,
sacrifice at all costs.
Yes, which is not even what God asks us.
No.
So,
and I was going to say, lastly too, forgiveness isn't a one and done, because sometimes it's a forgiving, and then something else gets triggered and we have to forgive another layer. There's layers of forgiveness. So I always like to say that, because sometimes we can like spiritually bypass, really the process. And, in scriptures, it says, forgiving 7 times 70, which is like this infinite number. So we forgive as often as we need to, right? And so I wanted to say that, because sometimes people are like, well, I forgive, or it gets held over you. You forgave me. Why are you bringing this back up? Another form of manipulation. So we have to be mindful and really have a true understanding of what that even means.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I've said that as well in some of my reels on my Instagram account, that, forgiveness is a process and it has many layers. And then you have to find your boundaries in and within that process. So what would you say then, Dani, to anyone that's watching this, who's out there, who is struggling right now, like is in the midst of betrayal or trauma, or are in a situation that they feel like, well, I can't make any waves, how can I go get help? Like I have to keep the status quo. Like, what would you say to somebody that's in any of those scenarios right now? Like, what's the message you would have for them?
Well, number one, that they're not alone. There are, sadly, thousands of people that are struggling with this that go unseen. And it will take an amount of courage to ask for help, to admit that there's a problem, step one, and this is like for the person who's acting out, but the person who's like been affected, it's like, I'm powerless in this, and I need to come to terms with there's a better way, right? A more healthier way. So I would say to them, number one, that they're not alone, and to reach out to a trusted friend, family member, or professional, whether that be a coach or a therapist, counselor, somebody that understands trauma, number one, because not everybody understands that, the dynamics around it, and that can, and then also too, to let them know, like, if they are reaching out, that, like, again, it's not a one and done. Like, if you've been dealing with something, like in my case, it was 20 years, like I couldn't go to a counselor and or a coach for 3 sessions and call it good.
Right.
So unfortunately, it's like it's not a quick fix. And so if you're looking for a quick fix, it's not likely going to get you very far. There's a commitment that needs to be made, and there's people that are willing to walk it through with you. And there's like support groups. That's the other thing too. Once you find help, then getting plugged into a support group, an active one that's really working their program, is beneficial too, because we learn from each other just how people show up, and what works for other people might work for you. What you want to avoid, though, is like the partner bashing, and so those
Let's
become
get together and bash whoever. I get that. Yeah,
something healthy that feels safe and connected, and to know that they're worth the work and the effort and the time and the expenses. It's not going to cost. It's like not a Groupon special. Like, we're making an investment in ourselves. And there are some of us that are out there that will work alongside people. Like, I was a single mom and I was working 3 jobs. I didn't have like hundreds and thousands of dollars to invest, but I did have to invest some, and some people were willing to work with me. So just know that too, that like we can come up with any excuse why we shouldn't or can't, but there's always a way. Just like there's always a way, and we have to get creative. So
yeah, I love
escalate.
that. Yeah, I love that. That's so great. So on that note, how can anyone who is struggling or just wants to investigate what this process might look like for them, how can they get in touch with you, Dani?
Well, they can go to my website, in which case they would learn a little bit about me, what my services are, and get a feel for who I am and how I help serve women. But I also work with male population as well. It's going to be under Dani, D-A-N-I-M, Peterson. So DANIMPETERSON.com. And there is a free consultations that I offer for those that are wanting to explore the options that I provide and the avenues. And it doesn't cost anything, it's free. And so there's a, like a Calendly, people can schedule a 45-minute consultation. And sometimes I'm willing to do up to 2 and or 3 on occasion under certain circumstances.
Which is very generous of you.
Yeah, because I want people to feel comfortable. I'm not here to give away my services for free, but I do understand the nature of having to trust and to know that this is the right program. There are other programs out there, so you can Google Betrayal Trauma specialists and see what happens. I'm also on Instagram and on Facebook, and so just even getting a feel for me and the content in which, how I show up and present. They can find me under Dani M. Peterson on Facebook and or Instagram too. So,
okay.
And those are on my website.
Excellent. And for all of our Just Love Inspired watchers, I'm going to be putting all of those details in the description once this video gets posted. So you'll be able to click on everything in easy access at that point to get in touch with Dani. And also don't forget, you can follow me on Instagram at Just Love Inspires and also on Facebook. I'd love to connect with you, so feel free to reach out, message me. You can share with me other topics that you guys are interested in hearing about. I want to thank Dani for her time today and sharing just this wealth of knowledge. These topics are so fascinating to me, and I could talk to you just for hours. Maybe we can circle back at some point and hear more about your personal journey, even discuss boundaries. I think that would be phenomenal as well. But let us know in the comments, everybody, what other topics you'd like to hear. And we thank you so much for watching Just Love Inspires TV.
Thank you.
I'm free falling in your love. I'm free falling.